Insane! Royal history of incest and inbreeding. Have you ever wondered why some of the most powerful and famous rulers in history had physical deformities, mental illnesses, or died young? The answer may shock you. They were the products of incest and inbreeding. Yes, you heard that right. Many of the royal families that shape the world we live in today are actually related by blood, sometimes very closely. In this video, we will take you on a fascinating and disturbing journey through the history of royal incest and inbreeding, and reveal the secrets, the scandals, and the tragedies that resulted from it. You won't believe what was considered acceptable in the past. Marrying your cousin, sibling, aunt, or uncle was actually quite common among certain kings and queens. It's hard to imagine, but they were willing to do anything to ensure their powers stayed within the family. They referred to it as consanguinity, but we see it as a recipe for disaster. Inbreeding can lead to severe diseases and deformities that can wreak havoc on the royal bloodline. It's astonishing to see how many monarchs, born from such unions, ended up ruling with questionable sanity. Throughout history, people have been involved in some pretty controversial stuff, and one of those things is incestuous relationships. Yes, that's when relatives get involved romantically or even marry each other. It has been viewed differently over time, sometimes considered really wrong and other times pretty normal. But why is it such a big deal? The main reason is the potential genetic problems it can cause for the children. We inherit 23 pairs of chromosomes from our parents, and those chromosomes carry genes that determine all sorts of things, like our eye color, height, and even intelligence. When a child gets one defective gene from one parent and a non-defective gene from the other parent, they have a lower chance of having a genetic disorder. If the parents are blood relatives, they're more likely to carry genes for the same genetic defects, and that means their children are at a higher risk of being affected by those defects. For instance, if first cousins have children together, it actually doubles the risk of infant deaths and the chances of physical and intellectual disabilities. The closer the relationship between the parents and the more generations of inbreeding that have happened in the family, the more problems can pile up. That's when you start seeing kids with multiple congenital defects and serious health issues. Even though people in the past didn't fully understand why inbreeding caused so many problems, they knew it was happening. So many countries and cultures made laws to ban incestuous marriages, trying to put a stop to it. But that didn't really stop the royal families from doing it anyway. They often wanted to keep their bloodlines pure and maintain their power within the family. It's kind of ironic because their pursuit of nobility ended up causing a lot of harm. Queen Victoria. You've heard of the famous Queen of England. She had a clever plan to marry her kids to royalty from other European countries. That way, she could control Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries through her family. For instance, her daughter Alice wed a Russian Tsar and gave birth to Alexandra Romanov, the last Tsarina of Russia, and her lover Prince Albert was her first cousin. That's right, their kids were all products of incest. The most noticeable effect of inbreeding in this royal clan is hemophilia. That's the disorder that stops your blood from clotting normally. Queen Victoria passed this trait to her kids and grandkids. She was fine with it, but they weren't. One of her kids and 5 of her grandkids died from hemophilia. Both the Queen and Prince Albert had the gene that caused hemophilia, and Queen Victoria's type of hemophilia was very rare. That made some people doubt if Edward, Duke of Kent, was really her biological father. More evidence backed up this theory when researchers said that for the kids to have hemophilia, both parents had to have the gene. And it was very odd for a rare type of hemophilia like Queen Victoria's to be passed down to her descendants. King Charles II of Spain. King Charles was a descendant of the Habsburgs, the most powerful family in Europe for hundreds of years. They ruled over many lands and had a lot of wealth and influence. But they also had a problem. They liked to marry their own relatives. This led to a lot of inbreeding, which caused them to have a strange physical trait, a huge jawline and a big tongue. This is known as the Habsburg jaw, and King Charles had it too. It made it hard for him to speak and eat properly, and he often drooled from his mouth. He was so inbred that he had many health problems. He was weak and sickly, and he couldn't walk until he was 8 years old. Even then, he had trouble walking and needed help from others. King Charles II wanted to have children, but he couldn't. He married twice, but both of his wives were infertile. Some people say that this was because of his inbreeding, which made him impotent or sterile. He also had many miscarriages and stillbirths with his mistresses. He had no son or daughter to inherit his throne, and he knew that he was the last Habsburg to rule Spain. He died in 1700 at the age of 38 after a long and painful illness. His death sparked a war over who would succeed him as the King of Spain. Joanne of Castile. Joanne of Castile was the daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, who were second cousins, and the big sister of another famous queen, Catherine of Aragon, who also had trouble having a baby because of inbreeding. She lived and ruled long before Charles II. Joanne was a smart, curious, and moody child. When she was 16, she married the son of the Holy Roman Empire, Maximilian the First Philip, the Handsome, in a deal made by their parents. Philip was a total player, but Joanne was head over heels for him. She didn't care about his cheating. She had her first mental breakdown when she became the queen, after her older siblings died. Her husband didn't help. He kept sleeping around and trying to take her power. She got angry when she found one of his mistresses and stabbed her in the face, but Joanne still loved him madly. When he died of typhoid fever at 28, she thought he was poisoned. She wouldn't leave his body. She slept next to his rotting corpse every night. Ferdinand the First of Austria. Ferdinand the First was another Habsburg with a crazy history. He was a direct descendant of Joanne the Mad, and his parents were double first cousins. That's right, they shared both sets of grandparents. Ferdinand the First had hydrocephaly, which means he had water in his brain that made his head huge. He also had the Habsburg jaw and epilepsy. He was very weak, but he still became a king. He ruled over many kingdoms like Hungary, Austria, Bohemia, Lombardy, and Venetia, but he didn't do much. His counselors and regents did everything for him. He had some weird habits, like sitting on a wastebasket and rolling on the floor, but he somehow managed to rule for 18 years and live until he was 82. King Ludwig was Empress Elizabeth's cousin, and he was also crazy. He came from the Habsburgs, who liked to marry their relatives. He was known as the king who lived in a fantasy world. He built huge castles to escape from reality. He was a kid. His mom saw that he liked to dress up and use his imagination. When he became king at 18, he still loved his dream world. He paid a composer, Richard Wagner, to make music for him and supported art, but the country was suffering from his spending and his neglect. He didn't care about his debts, only his castles. Princess Victoria Melita. Princess Victoria was Queen Victoria's granddaughter, but she didn't have the same problem as her grandma. She didn't have hemophilia, the disorder that makes your blood not clot, but she still had trouble because of inbreeding. Her grandma made her marry her cousin, the Grand Duke of Hesse. He was a cheater, and she caught him many times. She was very angry when they fought. They got divorced after Queen Victoria died, and their 8-year-old daughter Elizabeth of Hesse passed away. Inbreeding and incest were common practices among the royal houses of Europe for centuries. They thought it would keep their power and bloodline pure, but it only caused disease, deformities, and madness. This is the insane history of how marrying your relatives ruined royal families. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more.